Hey, this is Larry Whiteley. You've accidentally downloaded the Thinking Woodsman podcast. Keep listening. You're going to love it.
Larry, thanks for the great introduction. Everyone, welcome to the June Thinking Woodsman podcast, the confluence of humor and conscience in the great outdoors. I'm your host, Tim Chelsvik, and we are broadcasting to you from the redsgear.com studio. Gear up for your next big adventure at redsgear.com. On this month's show, we're talking about guns in public school classrooms, if that's a good idea or not, a huge bowfishing kill I managed a few weeks back, how to manage all your hunting properties. We have Ted Gartner on from Garmin International talking about upcoming GPS tech. Darrell Stiennen is back to talk about how to tell if your bow is out of tune. And then we visit with Brian Wilson, the owner and operator of Eyed Willys Resort in Lebanon, Missouri. Finally, in the Will It Kill It segment, we pit an iPhone 4 versus a dirt nap gear broadhead at 20 yards. Do you think the arrow deflected, it got partial penetration, or did it get complete pass-through? Stay tuned to find out, but now let's roll it into the big idea for the month of June. I'm so glad it's time for the June big idea. It feels like forever since I've had a chance to chat with you all. But before we get started, a few housekeeping things. One, if you haven't been to thethinkingwoodsman.com, the website has been refreshed. It's about 80% complete, but it's a major makeover. So please go check that out. And essentially what I did was I took all my content that I generated over the past couple of years, and now anytime you go to the front page, the landing page, you'll see all that stuff highlighted and featured, so it's a lot easier to get the content. So I hope that it's more user-friendly for you. Also, take a look. We should have some hats, some Thinking Woodsman branded hats for sale there. You can also see them on the Facebook page and see if that's something you want to slap on your head. Appreciate the support. And I also had to tell you about this monster carp that I killed bow fishing. It's finally summertime, time to break out the bow fishing gear. Many of you have seen this video of a 40-pound grass carp that I shot last year at a small farm pond on one of the properties where I hunt. Well, I'm back this year, and I have video of me hunting another one, but it was bigger, much bigger. I called it Moby Carp. This thing was a beast, and I snuck up on it. In fact, I've been scouting it for a while, and I finally saw it. This time of year, they tend to kind of make cycles from the shallow water to deeper water, and I think it's some type of breeding ritual that they're doing, although they can't breed appropriately in a pond. They need running water. This fish, I could see its dorsal fin and part of its caudal fin sticking up from the surface of the water near a downed willow tree. And so I snuck around. I got on my hands and knees, and this is all on video. Snuck around on my hands and knees and got close enough to it to where when it went out into out further into the pond, I kind of snuck in closer to the bank because I wanted to get as close as possible. These fish are so big, and I want as much kinetic energy going into them as possible. So got close. It comes by, and I stick it, and it just starts zinging line out of my bottle reel. And the only thing I can think of doing is to grab the line, and of course it melts my skin. It gives me a rope burn where I grab the line because I was afraid that I was going to run out of line, and it would just snap out the little plastic tab that's attached to my bottle reel. Well, it stopped running. I start to gingerly pull it back in, but it had run through a downed willow tree, and I was hoping maybe if I gave it a little slack, it would swim away, and I could try pulling it back, and like a snag when you're out just fishing, trying to get a jig out of a tree branch or something. Give it a little bit of line, maybe it'll drop down. That didn't work. Eventually, the line went limp, and the arrow just fell, and I knew that it was gone. Heartbreaking. So I came back a few days later with a buddy from work, and the fish was back. At least some fish were back. I could see two sets of dorsal fins and caudal fins sticking out of the water near that same willow tree. Well, got down, snuck in close, and my buddy was filming me with my iPhone, and I had my Garmin Verb attached to my bow. I finally got tired of sticking that camera in my mouth, and you all are probably tired of hearing me breathing as I'm hunting these fish. So I had a 2-angle shot. I sat on my haunches for probably 5 to 8 minutes waiting for either one of these fish to cycle out and come back in closer, because they were about 10 yards out, and that's a fairly long shot on a big fish like that. And again, they were in the downed willow tree. I waited and waited, and I started to get a little self-conscious about my buddy, who is not a bow fisherman, not a hunter, and I didn't want him to feel like he's waiting around for nothing. And the fish closest to me started to kind of sidle back a little bit in the water and started to spin a little bit and became broadside, if not angling, quartering away just a little bit. And I figured I should take this shot. And I had a little shooting lane through some of the foliage in front of me, and I shot, and once again the line just went zinging out of that bottle reel, and I was kind of on my haunches, crouched down. It pulled me onto my stomach, almost pulled the bow fishing rig out of my hand. My buddy had to help me grab it and pull it back in, and so I'm kind of gingerly pulling the line back, and this fish is fighting me. And I made the decision a few weeks ago when I shot the fish initially that got hung up in the willow tree and I lost, that I would never try to pull a fish like that through a snag again. Rather, I'd hop in a boat, which is what I did. I grabbed a boat and I went out in the middle of the pond while my buddy was holding onto my bow fishing rig. I found the line. I started picking up on it, and that's when I realized just what I had on the end of my line. I felt outclassed. I felt like I had bit off more than I could chew, because you know how big fish, the big fish, they don't move a lot, but they move a lot of water. I mean, you see their tail move, and you just see the water boils, and that's what happened with me when I got over this fish in the boat. I could, I see the taut blaze orange line going down into the dark water, and I'm starting to lift up on it, and then I see this massive caudal fin just thrashing, and it was a sight to behold. It took a while. It started to pull the boat a little bit. It took a while to finally get the fish up by the gunnel of the boat to where I could figure out how to land it. The fish was stuck kind of near the anal fin, up a little higher. Definitely not a mortal wound, and when I brought it up, I could see that this fish also had a wound in its stomach area near its pelvic fin, and I was like, or near the pectoral fin. I was like, man, that's the same fish that I shot a few days earlier. I stuck it again. Well, I'm sitting there kind of figuring out how I'm gonna get this fish in the boat, and I ended up one hand in the mouth, one hand in the gill plate, because I didn't have a gaff with me or anything, and I just kind of one movement brought it in. That's all on video. You can check that out on thethinkingwoodsman.com. It's a story called Moby Carp, something along those lines, but it was a big fish. 57 pounds, 48 inches, at a girth of 31 inches. By far the biggest fish I've ever landed. I've also done a video on how I processed that fish. My Rapala fillet knife, my electric fillet knife, just would not do the trick. So I had to bust out my Sawzall and go to town on it. So if you want to see a fish processed with a power tool, go to my website. You'll find it linked through. There's a YouTube video, and it was epic, and it worked. It really did work. I don't know how I would have cleaned it otherwise. So it's bow fishing season. I'm excited about that. I just wanted to catch you guys up on some of the stuff I've been up to. My buddy also just made me an atlatl. He homemade me an atlatl, even the darts. It's such an awesome thing. So stay tuned for some atlatl content. I may try to kill some fish this summer with it. If I get adventurous enough and practice enough with it, I may even try to kill a deer this fall. But if you're not familiar with an atlatl, I did a quick little how-to video. It's a primitive throwing device that the Native Americans used, and people that are really good at them, they say they can wing them over 200 yards. There's so much kinetic energy behind them. I interviewed a guy from St. Charles, Missouri last year who killed a 15-point buck with an atlatl, and he learned how to throw it at the Missouri Deer Classic, which is where I learned back in 2015. And he practiced every day from August through September to get really good at it, and he smacked this monster of a buck. And it's a lot of fun to throw the thing. It's amazing how effective and efficient it is, but that's something else. I'm an atlatl guy now, so be looking for some more content from that. But the big idea for the month of June is that ignorance is not bliss. Oftentimes it's terror. And I have something to confess. Up until a month ago, I had never eaten at a Chick-fil-A restaurant. I'll just let that sink in for a minute. People are always aghast when I tell them that, and it's not because I have anything against Chick-fil-A. In fact, I'm probably more in line with the owner's values than anyone else. I've just never been in a place that had a lot of Chick-fil-A's, and then when I wasn't eating a whole lot of fast food. Still don't. But my buddy Dominic was like, we're going to a Chick-fil-A. We're going to make this happen. It was incredible. Now, this is not a show about Chick-fil-A and how awesome their food is and how great the service is, and it is. But I was there, and I saw so many military, this was over by Scott Air Force Base over in Illinois. I saw so many military guys. I saw so many police officers, and there were more guns in that Chick-fil-A than probably most firearm stores, and they were all open carrying. And I happened to be talking to a lady I know about my experience at Chick-fil-A and I mentioned that was probably the safest place I'd been to all week just because of how many firearms were there in one place. And she just got this look on her face, and she said, more guns doesn't mean the place is more safe. And I could tell that, okay, this was something for her. And I said, well, don't you think it matters who is holding the gun? You know, who owns the gun? Whether it's a gangbanger or whether it's someone who's been trained and is a law enforcement officer and is properly licensed to be carrying. And I could just tell her body language was tensing up, and she's like, I just have an irrational fear of guns and firearms. And by the way, this is one of the most intelligent ladies that I know. And I could just see this visceral reaction just talking about firearms. And so I kind of took her cues. I didn't want to push her because I don't think that we make any friends. I don't think that we change anyone's minds by pushing them into a confrontational argument. Obviously, she was feeling alarmed at that point, so I just kind of stepped back. But I was happy that at least she was honest in saying that she had an irrational fear of firearms. She could have got on and spouted a bunch of statistics that are cooked or whatever, or her own opinions, but she just said, I have an irrational fear of firearms. I can at least appreciate an honest response like that. But I think there are some things that we can do to help people remove some of the stigmas around firearms, things that are black and look shooty, that kind of thing. And there's a great story out of Colorado City, the news station KOAA. They did a report on a group called Project Appleseed. And Project Appleseed was allowed to bring guns into a classroom, to a middle school, to show students what they are, how they work. And I think that's brilliant. But I'm curious, what do you think? Take a listen to the news report and we'll talk about it.
Dozens of guns brought into a Colorado City middle school today, all to teach an important lesson on gun safety. News 5's Lena Howland sat in on today's class. She joins us live now in Pueblo. Lena?
Well, this was quite the experience for students at Craver Middle School. They've spent the past 2 days learning everything about safely handling guns, where they've come from, why we have them, and how to shoot them.
If you'd like to pull the trigger, go ahead and do that.
Guns in the classroom, not something you hear every day.
Well, we're teaching them about the firearms so they're familiar with them, they can be safe with them.
It's a lot of guns to have in a school. especially since you probably don't have this many just at your house or something.
Jim Heath, a state coordinator of Project Appleseed, brought the 3-day program to Craver Middle School. The course teaches folks across the country how to fire these weapons accurately and safely, all built on the foundation of American history.
I think that it's better for them to have a respect for it, know how to handle it, not that they should, but they are aware about the firearms. It's not oh, what's this? What can we do with this?
And we found that many of these students, like Courtney Proctor, already had experience. How do you feel holding a gun?
I feel okay because I went shooting a lot when I was younger with my parents.
Not having much experience myself, I had Jim give us a few pointers.
Lean a little more aggressive. There
Okay.
you go. And we're going to bring the pistol up to your eye.
Okay.
And notch your head down to the pistol.
Leaving a lasting impression on teenagers.
I think it's pretty cool. It's something that, you don't get to see every day. It's something that you just get to come in and say, wow, look at all these just nice, awesome firearms.
Tristan Baker, a 7th grade student, says only halfway into the class, he's already taking away an important message.
You should never be afraid of a gun. Never, ever. You should have confidence around a gun. You should say, this is a gun. We gotta be careful with this. Even though we should never trust guns, we should always be careful with them.
These skills will be put to the test tomorrow as students will spend the entire day at a gun range, this time with guns loaded. Live in Pueblo, Lena Howland, News 5.
So what do you think? Is that a good idea or a bad idea? I happen to think it's an incredible idea, and I tell you what, the people that are the most against this particular strategy for helping curb gun violence, they also happen to be the staunchest supporters of sex ed in the classroom. And I'm asking the question, how are they different? Sex ed, we know that young people are going to find out about sex, and they're going to be interested in it. So why not give them the information and the data, the statistics, so that they can make an informed decision as best as a young person can? We try to demystify it. The same thing goes with firearms. I don't know why people are so terrified about keeping any mention or any specter of firearms away from kids, away from teens. When you do that, you make it more exciting. We all can think of the things in our parents' houses when we were growing up that were off limits. Well, guess what was the most exciting thing in our households when we were growing up? Those off limits things. So let's demystify them. Let's talk about them. Let's let them lay their hands on them in a safe environment where they can practice, where they can see what they're about, and they can understand the force and the finality behind pulling the trigger. I think it's a great idea. I'm sure this school district is going to take a lot of heat for doing this. But, when I was in high school back in the 90s, I was allowed to bring my bow and my old Bear Whitetail 2 along with me to PE class for our archery session. I can't imagine a student being able to do that today. So I think more information, more knowledge is better. I wish that this lady that I'd referred to earlier, I actually offered to have her come out to my house and take her out in the backyard and allow her to shoot the guns that I have to get some more knowledge so she can lower the irrationality she has about firearms. But she was not up for it, at least not yet. These kids in this middle school, hopefully they have a much better understanding of how firearms work. It's demystified. I think it's an awesome idea. That's the big idea for the month of June. Ignorance is not bliss. Oftentimes it's terror and leads to some pretty bad things. So let's be open and honest about firearms, and let's help our young people understand what they are and how they can use them safely and effectively. This month's Level Up skill is not actually a skill, but it's a strategy for keeping all your hunting properties straight, and it comes from my buddy Tony Caggiano, who runs World Slam Adventures, worldslamadventures.com. Guy knows how to kill some turkeys, but Tony does a lot of guiding. He's a professional turkey hunter, and when we were hunting this past spring, he had mentioned how he keeps a binder of all the properties that he hunts, and it includes maps, it includes contact information, and they're all in kind of comic book type sleeves, so they're weatherproof. But it allows him to be more strategic about how he chooses where he's going to hunt. He's got blind locations marked out, stand locations. He can kind of figure out wind direction and where the best places are going to be to hunt. So that's what I'm doing this summer. I'm putting together a binder of all my hunting properties, and I'll include also the sign-off permission slip that I get from all my landowners allowing me to hunt and giving me proof. So I keep one at the house, one in the Jeep, and I will have instant access. It doesn't matter if I have electricity or not. It doesn't run on battery, so I don't have to worry about that. Just having a hard copy of those things at a glance is awesome. It's a great idea. Thanks, Tony, for that. And that is your Level Up tip for the month of June. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Thinking Woodsman podcast, and I'm super excited today to have a guest on. Our guest today works with a company that probably many of you have interfaced with their devices before. I'm happy to introduce Ted Gartner. Ted is the Director of Corporate Communications for Garmin. Ted, welcome aboard.
Hello, how are you, sir? Good to be here.
I'm great. Thanks for spending time with us on the podcast. There's such a strong intersection between technology and outdoor pursuits, especially hunting and fishing and backpacking these days. So I'm excited to get to talk to you about some of the devices and the technology and what's up and coming with Garmin. But if you don't mind spending a few minutes to kind of talk about your experience in the outdoors and what led you to Garmin.
Sure. Well, I've been a lifetime outdoorsman. I grew up in central Nebraska hunting and fishing and camping and hiking and getting in all sorts of trouble out in the woods. And, so I'm kind of a natural at this whole thing. And that passion has always continued through my life, whatever I was doing. And probably about 13 or 14 years ago, I was working at a public relations firm here in Kansas City. And my boss came in the door and said, "Hey, we've got a new client. They're doing their IPO, or initial public offering, on the NASDAQ, and their name is Garmin. Have you ever heard of them?" Well, my eyes lit up because, yes, I had indeed heard of them, and I already owned a Garmin device at the time. I used it out boating to mark, fishing spots, or, to mark my truck on the way back from, bird hunting or whatever. So I was very familiar with Garmin, worked with them on their IPO, and then shortly thereafter, I guess I did something right because they hired me full-time, and I jumped aboard a Garmin 13 or so years ago, and I've been here ever since. And boy, how it has changed in the last 13 years from what it used to be. And it's always been really high-tech, but, the leaps and bounds that we've made in bringing cutting-edge technology into users' hands has really been extraordinary.
Well, and I'm sure someone out there knows the term for this, and you may, but there was a theory about processor speeds and how they're supposed to double every so many years, and that kind of changes. And my understanding is that we are superseding, in fact, in terms of our technological advances, we're superseding that original theory of processor speed development and how small and agile and nimble our electronics are becoming. So it's kind of an exciting time to be involved in electronics and technology in general.
It really is. Handsets are really kind of the thing right now. And by handset, I mean, everybody has a smartphone. All of that computing power that's either in your smartphone or in a GPS device or whatever, that's really kind of where the cutting edge in consumer electronics is right now. And it's fun to be a part of that. And yeah, I think processor speed has been a big advancement for us. Certainly displays, 13, 14 years ago, we didn't have any color displays.
Right.
It wasn't that long ago that color, became a thing. Certainly battery life, it's a fun time to be in consumer electronics for sure.
Well, so that brings up an interesting point, because I think that because of the age we live in, it's too easy to take for granted our technology. You know, you pick up your device and you turn it on, and most of us, if we were really called to the floor to ask the question, how does this thing work? Many of us just wouldn't be able to explain how our devices work. So, and I think the same holds true with GPS. Can you talk about like what actual beams or energy is sent between, their satellite receivers? So what kind of energy is sent down to them that they can pick up a signal that's 60 plus miles away up in space?
Right. Well, I really, when I try to explain this, I do remind people that this really is rocket science. It really is high tech. But it's a constellation of about 24 satellites that were put up, back in the late 70s and early 80s. And they've kind of been updated over the course of the years, but it's a very, very faint signal, which is why a lot of people, they can't get a GPS signal, deep inside their house or underground or in an elevator, a big metal box.
Sure.
And that's just because it's a fairly faint signal. But what you do when you turn on a GPS receiver, it starts looking for GPS satellite signals, and it figures out the location of each of those satellites that it can see. It needs at least 3 to triangulate your position, and once it does, it can give you a location, typically somewhere within 10 feet of your exact location, which for most people, that's more than enough accuracy than what you need. The more satellites you acquire, meaning the more it sees, the better your accuracy is going to be. It's important to note that a standard GPS receiver doesn't send out anything. Black helicopters are not watching you. You can't reach out to satellite signals. It's strictly a GPS receiver. Yeah. But that's basically the layman's way of how it works. It can get a lot more technical than that, but for most people, that's what they need to know.
Yeah, and it seems like over the past, I don't know, maybe 15 years or so, in fact, I still have my old Garmin eTrex Legend, and with the grayscale screen, and it seems like that GPS versus my Forerunner watch, it's still old, it's 7 years old now, but just the difference between the two in terms of their satellite acquisition time is so marked. It's so different.
Yep, it was probably maybe 8 or 9 years ago that the industry started coming out with high sensitivity receivers, and that's where you hit the nail on your head. Those were incorporated into our Forerunner GPS watches, and those were some of the first devices. But what it does is it allows for a much quicker satellite acquisition. You're not standing around waiting for minutes on end, and it also gives you a stronger, better lock on the satellites once you get them. So yeah, there have absolutely been kind of technologies and improvements, but it's pretty amazing to me that it's still essentially the same system that it was back in the early 1980s. And it's, we've been able to adapt, and GPS has really become, the fabric of our lives. It's not only used for location, pretty much every cell phone has to have one now. It's used in timing. Our whole banking industry uses not so much the location function of GPS, but the timing, because it's all atomic clocks on board those GPS receivers. So it's really something that we have come to rely on.
Well, how do you stay relevant? How does Garmin stay relevant in a world where you're making dedicated GPS and fish finding electronics and things like that, but smartphones can do so much for people now? How do you stay relevant there? Absolutely,
and it's a continual. We are continually reinventing ourselves. It seems like around here, we're sticking to our core and to our values. But we're branching out, and we're doing a lot of things that I think are kind of unique. Anybody can do GPS. Anybody can build an app. But what we really try to stress is purpose-built GPS devices. Now, and that's whether or not you're hunting, or you're fishing, or you're running, or you're cycling, or whatever. We have a purpose-built product that's out there for you that we think has some clear advantages over smartphones. Again, it was some of those things we talked about. battery life, sunlight readable display, how rugged is it. You should see we have a reliability test lab that is a very, very extensive lab that does everything from vibration tests to UV tests to drop tests. You name it, saltwater spray, all sort of, pressure, all of these different things we really test for. And I'll guarantee you that smartphones are not built for that sort of thing. Battery life is another thing. We make sure that not only just do our products have good battery life for what they're designed to do, but also for the most part, handhelds at least, you can change out those batteries. A lot of smartphones, you can't necessarily change your batteries. So there's a whole bunch of things that smartphones do well. I kind of call it the law of the Swiss Army knife. And if I've got a Swiss Army knife, meaning a smartphone, I can probably get by with doing a lot of different things. But when push comes to shove and it's time for me to gut a deer, do I want to do it with a Swiss Army knife, or do I want to, do it with a purpose-built blade?
Yeah.
That's kind of the way I look at it, and that's the analogy I use.
Well, and there are a fair number of times where I'm getting ready to go out for a run, and I know like the weather's going to turn bad, it's going to rain, or it's a muddy trail, and I'll throw my Forerunner on. I run with it all the time, but I know that I can leave my phone at home and not have to worry about dropping it or it getting wet because my Forerunner can take that. So that's a great example of, or let's say I'm doing a course and that means I have to submerge myself to get through an obstacle course or something, one of these Tough Mudder kind of events. I don't have to worry about my phone. I can, strap my Garmin, my Forerunner on, and I'm ready to go. Whereas my phone could maybe, take my GPS track and take my metrics and everything, but the chances of it getting damaged in the process are just too great. So I'll go with a purpose-built thing.
Yep, and that's our philosophy, and different companies are going about it in a different way, but this whole purpose-built philosophy, I think, has served us so well over the years, and we kind of continue to blaze trails in that.
Is there as you all look at development and what's on the horizon, is there a holy grail of GPS technology that everyone in that world is trying to achieve and just hasn't been able to yet?
I think we've reached a lot of those milestones, and it's kind of what we've been talking about. It's the battery life, I think, is a challenge for the entire consumer electronics industry. Yeah. Whether it's your smartphone or a GPS or anything, we'd all like to have stronger battery life. I think our displays, our touch screens, are very, very good now. I think accuracy is about as good as anybody needs it. I certainly think that it would be nice. If you were, say, for example, in a large shopping mall or maybe an enclosed stadium or who knows, where you don't necessarily get GPS, it might be, certainly advantageous to be able to have some sort of system that augments the GPS system so that you could have, navigation capability indoors. But I don't think there's really any holy grail out there or race to any particular thing. Mm-hmm. We're going to continue to iterate. We continue to make our user interface a lot better. We kind of move into new niches, and we do things for runners, cyclists, triathletes. So we're kind of refining our devices to fit our user profiles, basically.
Well, if you can ever develop a two-way GPS device that has really, really good sensitivity, I would purchase that in a heartbeat so I can find my wife in Walmart on Sunday after church when we're shopping and go get her and be able to drag her out. And
there you go. Well, and frankly, we're not too far away from that. We already have our Rhinos, which is basically a GPS incorporated with an FRS GMRS radio. So you and I can talk on those walkie-talkies, but not only can we communicate by voice, but whenever I talk to you, I send my location automatically and put it on a map on your GPS and vice versa. So there's that sort of stuff. Guys especially out west where the cell signals are just non-existent when they're out elk hunting or whatever, mm-hmm. Those are huge devices for us. So there's, we continue to innovate, and it's pretty crazy to see some of the stuff we're working on.
So you're sending that GPS data, then your coordinates over the radio signal. It's being interpreted by the receiving unit?
Yep. Exactly. Yep. So, and that's it's a great safety feature. If you're out there in the woods and God forbid something happens to you, you fall out of a stand, or your ATV gets stuck or whatever. People can kind of sweep the area and figure out where you are and and get to you. So it's a convenience thing. It's also a safety thing.
Absolutely. So I have a few Garmin devices. One of them is the Verb. I have the first iteration, the Verb Elite, and the redesign of that was so drastic, from kind of a longer form factor with the lens on the end, to now you kind of have the boxier form factor. Can you talk about the thinking around that and how that came to be?
Sure. Well, the Verb is our spinner on an action camera, and Garmin feels strongly that we never want to be a Me Too company. There might be other companies that are out first in the market, but we want to take that technology and say, okay, how can we Garminize it? And that's actually a word we use around here. Garminize things, and make them better and make them more functional for the consumer. So in that first iteration, we were really all about usability and user interface. And one of the frustrating things that I think anybody that has one of the leading cameras out there is you can't ever quite remember, okay, how do I turn this thing on? What button do I need to push? And so we wanted to make it super simple. So we put this big old fat slider on the side of it, which anybody knows if they slide that thing forward, it turns on. They slide it back, it turns off. That may not seem like that big of a deal, but it was a lot of people really appreciaed that.
Yeah.
Because it was simple. We also put a display on the top of it. We listened to feedback from consumers, and they were frustrated that there was no way that they could see what they were taking a picture of. They couldn't set up a shot. They couldn't review a shot. Having that display also gave us some more real estate to make the user interface more elegant. So we brought that out to market, and it did fairly well. But then we kind of wanted to reiterate it and make a smaller version. We got feedback that we liked the easy on, easy off, but we really need one that kind of fits in a smaller form factor. So we went back to the drawing board and kind of reiterated it. We don't have the display on there anymore, and those are all design trade-offs that we have to make. Everybody wants everything on any device,
right.
And it's it really truly is a pick your poison sort of thing. You can have a really great, large, bright display, but you're going to sacrifice battery life. There's all sorts of design and engineering trade-offs that we have to struggle with. So we kind of went a different route. And it's had some good reaction as well. But Garmin is one of those companies that we're never beholden to a design or a certain thought process. We're always open to new ideas. It's a fun place to work because of that.
Well, and kind of a cool way to just get to experiment. Obviously, the experiments that you all are taking part in are on a larger scale because you're talking about research and development and design and manufacture and getting the thing to market. But it's like a big toy box or a big workshop where you get to work on this stuff. And the Elite, the Verb, the first go round was great. I'm excited to get my hands on one of the new Verbs, because I keep it with me pretty much wherever I go, whether I'm in the deer stand or just recently I took my daughter out fishing. She was reeling in a little sunfish, and this nice largemouth bass just came up and sucked down her sunfish. And so while I got the fish on the rod with one hand, I reach in my bag and pull out my Verb and turn it on and immediately start recording. You just never know what you're going to run up against, so it's nice to have a small form factor, great battery life device that you can capture these moments that you just don't know when it's going to happen.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And we try to do that, and we try to make a device that's useful to people, but also kind of unique from anything else in the market. And we have what we call G metrics on the Verb, where if you're cycling with your Verb, it'll tell you your speed, your pace, your distance. If you want to wear a heart rate monitor, it'll put that data and display it right on the video for heart rate. I did that when I was out hunting and shot my first deer with a bow this last fall. You should have seen my heart rate go.
Congratulations! Which also means that you're hooked. You're a bow hunter for good now.
Totally hooked. And in fact, it's kind of funny. I came into bow hunting late. My son really kind of brought me into it. He hunted first, and started getting a little bit lippy and braggy about things. So I said, "All right, buddy boy, I'm going to have to go out there too." So, but it's been a fun sport, and it's kind of, I'm 47 years old, and it's kind of fun to pick up a new sport like that, and you feel like a kid again.
Well, and the great thing about bow hunting is that you can enter it at any point, and you can do it for such a long time. It's not like, in fact, in the April edition of the Thinking Woodsman podcast, I talk about the small window of opportunity people have to play mainstream athletics, football and baseball and basketball, and how those are typically a one-shot deal. You get injured or you just age out of it. And bow hunting is something. I have a buddy that's 82 years old. He killed a doe last year with his crossbow. He's still getting out there.
Well, and not only that, but my son and I like to just shoot our bows, and that's easy to do, whether it's in your backyard or at a nearby range. We love to shoot guns too, but it's more of an investment in ammunition. It usually takes longer, and the way my son likes to shoot, it can be an expensive endeavor. But bow hunting, just going out and shooting with your son or your buddy or whatever, is just kind of a relaxing pursuit too. So you don't necessarily have to always be hunting a critter. It's just fun to do in your backyard.
Archery in and of itself is a great sport, and then you add in the hunting and bring home some venison. It makes a lot of sense. But if folks want to see an example of kind of what Ted's talking about in terms of performance metrics overlaid onto video, if you go onto the Thinking Woodsman Facebook or YouTube channel, you can see some cycling videos that I've posted of me doing some of the hills out here in the Ozark foothills where I live on my road bike, and you can see heart rate and elevation and speed, all those metrics right there like a dashboard on the screen. It's such a cool, I could spend hours just looking at that stuff. It's so much fun to have that data at your fingertips. But if you want to see an example of it, check out the Thinking Woodsman YouTube channel, because it's all there. Ted, so I consider myself and a lot of the listeners to the show to be outdoor mutts. We don't solidly fit. We're hardcore bow hunters, bird hunters, waterfowlers, turkey hunters, and many of us also run and cycle. And so we just love to do a lot of things outdoors, but we don't fit squarely into one category of activity. What is on the market right now as far as Garmin products that you would suggest for folks that are kind of hybrid sport folks?
Sure. Well, you can look at any number of our handhelds or that kind of thing, but really the hottest space right now is wearables, and basically that's a nerdy word for watches. There's certainly our Forerunner line is great. That's catered more purpose-built, if you will, more for the runners. The one that I wear and I like incredibly well is called the Phoenix 3. And it's a big, rugged, chunky watch. It's not for the small-wristed, but it's a really good-looking watch, and it'll do just about anything you want it to do. If you're running, if you're swimming, if you're triathlon, cycling, whatever, it'll give you all that data that you need. If you're out in the turkey woods this spring or hunting mushrooms or whatever, you can mark your truck and get back to it. It's also got a step counter in there. So if you're sitting at your office like I do on most days, and you haven't been moving for very long, it'll buzz you and it'll say, "Hey, get up! You need to walk around." There've been a lot of studies that have shown, even though a lot of us are active for 30 minutes or an hour a day, running or doing something that is an intense workout, if we spend the rest 23 hours of the day being sedentary, we're losing out on a lot of that. So what our devices do is they kind of remind you, hey, every hour or so, get up and walk around and reset that move bar. Yep, I'll guarantee you, it's funny around here seeing people. Of course, everybody's got a Garmin here. The level of activity of people just walking around, it's really kind of changed things over the last couple of years with that step counter in there. Another cool thing that this does is you can pair it with a smartphone. so you can get messages, text messages, emails, or whatever on
Oh,
the
wow.
wrist. Originally I thought, well, gosh, why do I want to do that? Well, if I'm in a meeting with my boss or my boss's boss or whatever, I don't want to be checking my phone. But I might be expecting an important text from my wife or from one of my kids or something.
Mm-hmm.
All I have to do is just very discreetly look down, glance at my watch, and see what that text is. Pretty handy. So there's also some smartphone connectivity there, which, it's kind of neat. We were talking about how we have purpose-built units, and that's for sure. But we also find a way to connect them to your smartphone because, let's face it, that's everybody's most important device these days.
Well, yeah, and I could see an application where when you're in the deer stand and it's so cold you do not want to take your hands out of your pockets unless you're going to kill something, just to be able to look down and see what kind of text you got coming through. You don't have to unzip your phone out of your pocket or something.
Yep. And it'll also, if you do want to run with your phone and you're in an unfamiliar area or whatever, you can send basically a notice to your wife or family or whoever and say, hey, you can follow along with my run. And so then on their smartphone, they can see exactly where you are, which is a nice safety feature.
Yeah, so the phone becomes a sending unit for your GPS receiver. That's slick. All right, well, that's going on my wish list then for my wife for Christmas, so she knows what she always says I'm so hard to shop for. We can make that happen.
There you go. Well, you just say, honey, this is for safety.
Safety.
And, I find that typically works better than hey, I just need a new piece of kit.
I have worn that safety word out so much. It's like, really, is it really that dangerous?
Safest man out there, huh?
Right. Well, how about any sneak peeks at upcoming technology, things that you're working there at the Skunk Works at Garmin?
Well, our Skunk Works is alive and well, but it's also pretty skunky. We don't say a lot about. We don't say a lot about what we're developing, mainly because this is such a competitive industry. And quite frankly, a company like Garmin, you may not think it, but we have the mentality that we're not only competing with other GPS and fitness device makers, but we are also competing with the big smartphone companies.
Yeah.
So it's, we do try to keep things pretty close to the vest. I will say that within the past few months, your listeners may have heard that we acquired DeLorme, which is primarily known as a mapping company, but they also have a really cool device called the InReach. And InReach is a two-way satellite communication, so you can communicate by text back and forth anywhere in the world. It uses satellites to do that.
Okay.
And that's, there's obviously, again, we go back to the safety word, but there's some real safety component to that too. Can't tell you exactly what we're going to do with that, but I don't think, I know your listeners are smart. And
we can draw some conclusions.
Yes, I would absolutely, think that they could probably draw some conclusions on where we're going with that. But I think that aligns well with our many different markets because we're in, hunting, fishing, outdoor, marine, aviation, all that. So that's probably one thing that I might be able to tip our hat on a little bit, but just keep an eye on Garmin because we are continually coming out with some new stuff, and hopefully we'll get the chance in the coming months and years to talk about some of those cool devices.
Yeah, I'd love to, and also just want to get this recorded so for posterity and so people can hear this. I have a product development idea for you that you can feel free to pass along to your team. But I've often thought that when I go out for a run, especially at nighttime, how great it would be if my Forerunner had a strobe mode on it, because obviously it has a backlight on it. If that thing could strobe, and that would serve as kind of a safety light while I'm out on a dark street or something, without having to wear another device, as in like a headlamp or something on me.
Sure. No, and that's a great idea. We're actually looking at light technology. We've done some of that stuff, not so much for our runners, but for our cyclists. We've got some really cool bike lights. You wouldn't think of Garmin as being a bike light company, but
yeah.
What we've done is we've taken the typical dumb bike light and made it smarter. With different beam intensities depending on how close a vehicle comes to your bike or whatever. So it's a lot of those what we call adjacent markets, adjacent to our core technologies of GPS that we continue to just innovate and expand into. So it's quite a place to work, and we've come out with a lot of fun stuff.
Well, Ted, we could talk for hours about GPS devices. I mean, it's fascinating to me, the intersection between our passions around the outdoors and then these devices that help us to enjoy the outdoors in some different ways. But I sure appreciate you taking the time to join us today on the Thinking Woodsman podcast.
Great to talk to you, and look forward to doing it again soon, and good luck in the woods this spring.
Absolutely. Yeah, you too. All right, gang, you're listening to the Thinking Woodsman podcast. All right, welcome back, everybody. We're talking to my friend Darrell Stiennen, owner and operator of Select Archery, Norma, Illinois. Darrell and the shop, as you know, are now official sponsors of the Backyard Bow Range. So, Darrell, you are personally responsible now for the damage done back there.
We signed a liability and waiver and all that fun stuff, right? So any explosions that doesn't come back on me, correct?
I don't even know what a liability waiver is.
Okay, perfect. All right.
Is it a cookie?
Yes.
By the way, you have a lot of fire extinguisher material to pick up in my backyard.
Right. Okay, I'll be right down.
Well, we know that the people are still shooting, and just because it's not hunting season right now, it's not deer season, that we're not still actively out shooting our bows. But I wanted to focus this month, Darrell, on like the top 3 or 4 things that a person can tell if their bow is out of tune just by the way it's performing.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. No, there's a couple of easy kind of markers that you need to look for. First one, and probably the most obvious one, is if you get a strange noise or vibration that you don't recognize or you haven't noticed before. That can tell you that you've got a cam firing out of time or something loose on the bow, something's not quite right. That's the most obvious usually is a noise or a vibration. That's an easy one to fix. Usually you just kind of track it back, tap on the bow lightly while you're holding it on the handle, and you'll hear the vibration even without the shot, and you should be able to kind of work all the screws tight until you figure out which one it is. That's not something generally you need to get back to the shop for, but if you can't track it down, that can be one that's not safe. So if you can't get it, take it to the shop, make sure it gets taken care of. Next one that you really want to kind of look for is if you put your bow away and it was shooting really well, you're getting good groups, you didn't see anything weird in the arrow flight, and now all of a sudden you're taking it out and you're shooting poorly, you're not getting very good accuracy, your groups open up, you're seeing kind of a cartwheel, you're seeing a whip in that arrow when it fires. Something's changed, something's moved. Either it wasn't ever set up properly in the first place or something's come out of time. Generally, if you're getting something like that, that's something you usually, depending on your level of skill as far as tech work, usually that's something you want to go to the shop for. Either the rest is moved, the D-loop, the knocking point is moved, which is pretty common. That's one that's a lot of folks don't catch, but your serving material in the middle of your string there, it can actually slide up or down the more you shoot. That's something you definitely want to keep an eye on. Your whole knock point can move, and you can ride that arrow as much as a half-inch knock high without even knowing it. So that's an easy one there.
I had an extremely frustrating experience with my bow out in my backyard a few years ago. I was shooting. The first shot was okay, and then they just got progressively lower and lower, and I'm like, what is going on? Because a lot of my, for better or worse, I tie my self-worth sometimes to my shooting ability, and it drives me nuts. And I was like, I'm not this terrible of a shooter. What's going on? I was just hoping and praying it was something wrong with the bow, and the elevation on my sight, the elevation knob had gotten loose, and so every shot I was taking, there's a little vibration was allowing it to slip down the dovetail rack just a little bit, and so my shots kept changing. I'm like, oh man, and I was so relieved to find it, and I got rid of that junker sight, by the way, but I was glad to find it wasn't me. It was something with my bow, but it was loose. I could tell something sounded a little different, and I was shooting inconsistently.
Yeah. Well, that's just it. Yeah, and usually you can diagnose it yourself, and you have to know your shot. You have to shoot well enough and often enough to know when it is you and it's not you. You know what I mean? If you pick your bow up once every 9 months and expect to be able to just throw 4 or 5 in the bullseye, and that's not usually very realistic. So I mean, you have to know yourself. Right. The other kind of the last one is your sight alignment. So kind of like what you were just talking about. If you are for some reason you have to move your sight way to the left all of a sudden to hit center, a lot of times that is your rest again has moved, or something has moved. Your anchor has moved. Something is wrong. If you have to move it way high or way low, get that bow in, get it looked at. Because if your cams come out of time, if you have a binary cam or a cam and a half system, and you've got one cam firing in front of the other, everything will go crazy. Everything will just be off. Your point of impact will change. Your arrow flight will change. Your groups will change. I mean, everything. Especially when you go to put a broadhead on. That's when it'll really magnify. You might be able to live with a little bit of whip with a field point, but when you put that broadhead on, it'll show its ugly head.
Well, and this I think is also a great reason why we need to be shooting at distances greater than 20 yards. Because you talk about broadheads magnifying issues with your bow or issues with even your shot sequence and your release process, but distance will magnify those things also.
Oh, absolutely they will. Yeah, and distance gives you a better. It's funny to think, but I mean, the more you shoot, the better you see the arrow fly. A lot of us, when we shoot at the shop, we can see the arrow fly inside of 20 yards. I'll stand behind customers a lot and watch the flight of the arrow. It's a lot easier to pick up at 40, 50, 60 yards than it is at 20. So if the arrow is doing something funny, you'll see it out at those further distances. You can catch it in 20 yards, but it's a lot easier out there at that further distance to see what's going on.
If you have concerns about your rig, the way it's shooting, obviously, my gut is I check myself first. I just assume it's something with me. I would love to blame it on my bow, but a lot of times it's me. But once you kind of take yourself out of the equation, then you need to start looking for things that are loose or inconsistent and changing, right. and some of those things, like you said, probably make sense to bring it into the shop and have someone who's trained to look it over. Because you think about something like cam timing. I'm not capable of doing that, at least at my skill level here at the house. That's something I want to take to a shop. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and a lot of times that's something you can diagnose at the house. You can see a lot of these newer bows have kind of at-rest timing marks, we call them. So there'll be a little notch or a mark or something on the cam when the bow is at rest that'll tell you what's going on. It's all well and good to find it, but getting it fixed is right. What do you do about it?
Do you have a press in your kitchen? I mean, getting it fixed is a little tougher to do. So you want to get it to a shop. If you can't get to a shop, if you live in the middle of Montana and you're 5 hours away from a good shop, YouTube and buy a whole bunch of tools. I mean, there's not a lot of options there.
Great. Well, folks, I have to share with you that Darrell is very close to being a daddy again. His wife Tracy, another one of my buddies from high school, is about to give birth any day now to a baby of unknown sex. So we're all waiting with bated breath to find out if it's a little boy or a little girl. So Darrell, wanted to say congratulations. We're praying for you and Tracy, and excited to hear what you guys end up with.
Absolutely. No. Thanks for. We'll be sure to update everybody at the next month. Hopefully everything goes well.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you want to find Darrell, if you want to talk to him, if you want to check out the shop, if you're in the Central Illinois area, selectarchery.com. They're on Facebook, Instagram, all over the place.
Yep, absolutely. Come find us. We're available. We love answering questions. We love helping folks out. So don't be afraid to pick our brains.
Perfect. All right, guys. This is the June episode of the Thinking Woodsman podcast. Darrell, thanks again for joining us.
No problem. Thank you, buddy. I appreciate it.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Thinking Woodsman podcast. I'm joined by Brian Wilson. Brian is the owner and operator of Eyed Willys Resort here in Lebanon, Missouri. And I gotta say, like, the setup, we're down here for a media hunt weekend through the Missouri Outdoor Communicators. And normally when you come on a media hunt, you never quite know what the accommodations are going to be like. And for those of you that have been watching my Facebook feed, you know that the accommodations are pretty slick. I feel like I'm on vacation. Brian, welcome, and thanks for having us.
Thank you, Tim.
So tell us about how long you've been here, what your kind of philosophy on hospitality is, because I think I can tell, but I want to hear you talk about it.
Well, we started Eyed Willys in 2004, and kind of with the intention to make people feel like they've been on vacation and not on a camping trip. So if you want to come down and tent camp and enjoy yourself right there on the banks of the Niagara River, you can. Or if you'd like to upgrade a little bit and get a cabin with air conditioning or heat, then it's available for you here at the campground.
Yeah, and the cool thing about having the Niagara River so close is you've got Bennett Springs State Park. So
8 miles away.
Yeah, if you want to fly fish for trout and catch a bunch of trout, you've got that right there. The Niagara is a great smallmouth stream, so you can fish that. And then we were just this morning, and not obviously this morning for the podcast, but this morning in current times in April 2016, we were on some great public land turkey hunting.
Yes, you were over at Lead Mine Conservation Area, which is a hop, skip, and a jump from here.
Yeah. So there's so much you can do. Talk about the gift shop that's here at the resort, because that's a significant. That's not like there's a hat and a T-shirt in there. That's a significant store.
Right. 2 years ago, we opened up the Whiskey River gift shop and incorporated antiques along with new items from markets, from Dallas to Atlanta markets. And I go around and handpick everything for the shop. So you can find anything from a kitchen cabinet to a sofa table to antiques, clocks. We got a full line of candles, and we've got our Eyed Willy apparel in there too.
It's not your typical resort gift shop.
It's not a typical resort gift shop. It's something if you want to come down and stay the weekend, and maybe you don't want to hit the river, you can hit the shop here. Also go into Lebanon and hit the antique shops. I just try to make something for everybody. From young to your older people that maybe don't want to hit the river. They want to come down and just look around and do a little shopping.
You know, earlier we were talking about you wanting to make people's stay here feel like they went on vacation and not like... Because I do a fair amount of camping, and you do feel kind of tired and beat up and sore and wore out after a camping trip. But this is a great mix of camping and or resort living. Talk about some of the amenities that you all work in, or the services that you work in, to help it feel more like a hotel stay or something along those lines.
From Memorial Day to Labor Day, we are a full-service campground. We run food. So we serve breakfast, lunch, and dinner on the weekends from Memorial Day to Labor Day. We also can cater for private parties, weddings, things too.
Sure.
But while you're here staying on the weekends and you are down in the campground, we drive around and deliver firewood directly to your campsite.
Nice.
We drive around with the four-wheelers with ice on the back of them. So you're not, when you come here, if you don't want to pack a bunch of food, you don't have to. We can do the cooking for you. A lot of times people will maybe cook on Friday night, but they do breakfast, lunch, and dinner right here on Saturday. So when they come in, they do the outdoor thing on Friday night. Saturday, we take care of everything. Sunday morning, they get up and eat biscuits and gravy, and they're headed back home.
On a full stomach. And if you got kids and you got a family, that you kind of remove a layer of complexity when you're doing a trip like this. If food's already taken care of.
Right. And, you know, by the time our food is priced so good that it costs probably more to cool it than it does to just buy your food here.
Yeah.
By the time you go through how many bags of ice in July.
Well, and I sampled some of your mom's cooking at lunchtime today, and I'm hooked. In fact,
She's a good cook.
I think I got my calorie intake for the next couple days taken care of. So I can definitely attest to the food. Well, Brian, if folks want to book a stay or learn more about the resort, how do they find out more?
They can give us a call at 417-993-2628. They can also look us up on the web at www.oneeyedwillys.com.
Okay, perfect.
And you know, one thing I'd like to say is our whole staff at Eyed Willys is geared up to treat this campground like it's their own. And so we work hard to make sure that everybody that's employed here is really in gear with what we want.
With the philosophy, yeah.
And it's worked for us. It really has.
Yeah, and you can tell, and we don't have to go too far into this, but a lot of times in resorts, hotels, campgrounds, you notice the places where people go infrequently, and you notice how little attention has been paid to them. I've yet to find that spot here at the resort. So obviously people care. It's not just you that cares. It's
Right.
the rest of the team that cares and makes a
I've got a
difference.
good team behind me in this business.
Okay, well, if you're looking to do a little vacationing in the Ozarks, get some fishing in, some floating in, and have a range of accommodations from camping to hotel style stay, check out Eyed Willys. All right, we're back in the Backyard Bow Range, brought to you by Select Archery. And this month, I'm also happy to announce that we have an official broadhead of the Backyard Bow Range, and they are Dirt Nap Gears Dead Right There, or DRT broadheads. They're fixed blade. They've got a bleeder blade on them. These are the broadheads that I shot at the fire extinguisher last month, and it caused that big explosion. So check these guys out there, dirtnapgear.com. The one really cool thing about these broadheads that really sets them apart from others is that they have an adjustable weight system on them. So they have a collar that you can add 25 grains. So you can shoot 100 grain broadhead, or if you need a little more kinetic energy, you can just screw this little collar on that comes with the broadheads, screw it onto the ferrule, and you've got a 125 grain broadhead, which is a really slick and really flexible dynamic system. So check them out, Dirt Nap Gear broadheads. They're at dirtnapgear.com. They are the official broadhead of the Backyard Bow Range. But this month, guess what's getting it? It's an iPhone. So we're going to see if the arrow deflects, if we get partial penetration, or if we get full penetration. So stay tuned to the Select Archery Backyard Bow Range, and we'll see what happens. That was devastating. That is full pass-through, baby. Holy buckets. That's a mess. Look at that. So that broadhead smashed clean through the phone. Spider webbed the glass on the front. Knocked the bottom housing off around the home button. Let's see how much penetration we got. Oh yeah, that's quite a bit. In fact, it just clipped the battery. The battery might be salvageable. That's devastating. All right, so the conclusion of our Select Archery Backyard Bow Range Will It Kill It segment is that clearly from 20 yards, an iPhone is no match for a Matthews No Cam HTX slinging a Easton Bloodline tipped with a Dirt Nap Gear broadhead. This iPhone is toast. Holy buckets, that was another jam-packed show, wasn't it? Well, we're about to wrap things up from the redsgear.com studio, but I wanted to say a big thank you to Reds Gear and to Select Archery and our new friends over at Dirt Nap Gear, and encourage you all to show your support for the show by giving them a shot at your business. And also follow me on social media on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter to stay up to date with everything I'm doing in the field, stuff I'm killing or catching or whatever. Stay up to date via social media. And if you want one of those limited edition first run Thinking Woodsman ball caps that very few people are going to have because I'm making very few to begin with, go to thethinkingwoodsman.com and you can order via PayPal. It's secure and quick. They're $20. I sure appreciate that. Well, the sun is setting and it's time to climb down out of the stand and head back to the truck. From the redsgear.com studio, this is your buddy Tim Chelsvik saying, I'm thinking it's time you got outdoors.
listening to the Thinking Woodsman podcast.